Happy Thanksgiving. We just happened to move Wednesday's study meeting to Thursday because I've been ill. And I found an interesting thing for those of you that are enjoying Thanksgiving. I bet many people don't know the basis of how that started. That's actually a presidential proclamation by Abraham Lincoln in 1863 during the middle of the Civil War. Okay, a lot of people think it goes back to the Pilgrims and Jamestown and all that stuff, but in actuality it was a proclamation by Abraham Lincoln that even though we're in the middle of the bloodiest civil conflict that our young nation has ever seen, we should be mindful of the many things that we do have to be thankful for. So he said the third Thursday of every November from now on, set it aside to kind of remember that no matter what's going on, there are very many positives around you, but you just have to have the life condition to be able to perceive them and have them, impact you in a positive way. So, that's the point that I wanted to make. Now, going on, we will start. As we had said prior to, we took a 2-week break, and we had a great time in those 2 weeks off. Bottom line is we're going to go ahead and read we've all read this already, but because it's not on video, we're going to go ahead and go back and supplement to complete that video part of it. I think that goes to about page 130 or something. So we're reading tonight from the Heart of the Lotus Sutra. For those of you that have not read this is a great, great teaching from Daisaku Ikeda. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the editor's note from the very beginning. Always I encourage everybody, when you read anything, read it all the way from the very beginning, because it'll give you explanations and insights that will allow you to understand what you're going to read later more clearly from the standpoint of the intent of the author. So, editor's note on page, I think they're not even listed as pages, at the very beginning here. The Heart of the Lotus Sutra by Daisaku Ikeda. Everybody's settled in and we're ready to go here. I'm going to try and read all the way through to page 20 or 22, so I'm going to be reading and reading tonight. All right. The Heart of the Lotus Sutra brings together in one volume SGI President Ikeda's lectures on the expedient means and lifespan chapters. These lectures originally appeared in the World Tribune from May 19, 1995 through April 5, 1996, and were published those same years as the 3-volume work titled Lectures on the Expedient Means and Lifespan Chapters of the Lotus Sutra. This work provides a line-by-line explanation of the key prose section of the Expedient Means chapter and the prose and verse sections of the Lifespan chapter. Nichiren Daishonin taught that the Lotus Sutra's core teachings were contained in these sections, and he often urged his followers to recite them as a way to supplement their chanting of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. He never specified a format for such recitations. So if anybody ever says, you're not doing Gongyo correctly, just say, according to who? Okay? Because everybody's manner of doing Gongyo at this point in time is a circumstance of tradition. All right? So there was never any official dictate left by the Daishonin in any specific teaching saying, this is how I want you to do morning and evening Gongyo. There's no recitation of the sutra requirement, okay? That's why for many years, for many centuries, not years, for many centuries, the function of reciting the Lotus Sutra was really not a layperson's kind of a thing like we do right now as members of SGI, okay? It was really something that was left up to the priesthood. All right, and you just basically go support the priesthood, and that would be the end of it. You'd never really get into trying to understand or actually recite the Lotus Sutra. So he says, again, continuing on this editor's note, he never specified a format for such recitations, however, and the format evolved over the centuries. So it's not from Nichiren, it's from custom and tradition. At the time these lectures were first published, the liturgy included all 3 sections, an excerpt from the Expedient Means chapter, the prose section of the Lifespan chapter, and the verse section of the Lifespan chapter. Remember, we always used to have A, B, and C in Gongyo. Now we don't, right? We got rid of the prose section of the Expedient of the Lifespan chapter. So he says, SGI members recited these sections 5 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening. So the fact that Gongyo can change, now I've already lived through one of those changes, thank God. Because back in the old days when we first started, that was something, you'd never chant Daimoku. There was no time to chant Daimoku. Just getting Gongyo done every day, in the morning and the evening, pretty much took up everything. And took up all the free time most people had, you know. So that's one of the reasons why Soka Gakkai changed the format to allow for more time to actually chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo with your Gongyo. Because Gongyo was taught as being almost like a prerequisite. You had to start your day, do morning and evening Gongyo. You weren't really practicing unless you did Gongyo twice a day. If you skipped Gongyo, you were screwed up, and eventually, and we could all see from practical experience, if you didn't do Gongyo with a steadfast conviction to do it, a commitment to do it, you would suddenly see yourself start to drift off, okay? So there wasn't as much of an emphasis to chant Daimoku as there was to establish a consistent daily practice. Now we're really encouraged to chant as much Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, Daimoku, as we possibly can, because that's actually the exercise that will bring forth your Buddha nature. Okay, that is the way to achieve Buddhahood in your present form. Okay, so he says at these times, at the time these lectures were first published, which was back in the 90s, the liturgy included all 3 sections: an excerpt from the Expedient Means chapter, the prose section of the Lifespan chapter, and the verse section of the Lifespan chapter. SGI members recited these sections 5 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening. In 2002, SGI adopted the current format for Gongyo, which no longer includes the prose section of the Lifespan chapter, and reduced the number of recitations to once in the morning and once in the evening. The change was made for 2 reasons: to allow members to concentrate on their primary practice, chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and to simplify the practice and make it more accessible to people all around the world. Because a lot of people, in trying to get established with Gongyo, it was just could never get, and then they were always made to feel like they were lepers if they weren't already doing Gongyo consistently. You were a sinner or something, right? And that's not the correct attitude anyhow. Gongyo is not something that you can arbitrarily decide to do or not to do, but you're not a bad person if you find devilish functions keeping you from being able to consistently do it. That is a struggle. Each individual has to overcome and do the human revolution that they incorporate a rhythm of daily recitation of the sutra in their daily life, okay? All right. Though SGI members no longer recite the prose section of the Lifespan chapter, we have included in this volume all the original lectures because of their invaluable content. We also have left the original language that may refer to SGI members' recitation of the prose section, adding notes for clarity as necessary. We have divided the book into 3 main sections, this book. The Expedient Means chapter, the Lifespan prose section, and the Lifespan chapter verse section. Each section begins with an introductory chapter and is followed by the pertinent sutra passages. We've numbered each passage for easy reference. In the years since these lectures originally appeared, new translations, more, Burton Watson kind of stuff, more capable translations of the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren's writings have been published. We've updated the text accordingly to include these advances in correct translation for the time that we're now reading it, right? Reading it in accord to the language used in 1950 is not the appropriate way to perceive it in 2020, okay? We've updated the text accordingly. For frequently cited works, we provide the following abbreviated citations in the text, and then it goes on to GZ as Gosho Zenshu, LSOC as Lotus Sutra, OTT is the orally transmitted teachings, and WND is the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. Okay, so starting on page 1, impressions. This is like a foreword from Daisaku Ikeda. Impressions of my mentor's state of life. And so the significance of this is that everything that we're going to read in this book actually originates around the understanding that was incorporated into the daily practice and teaching of the Soka Gakkai as it was founded by Tanesaburo Makaguchi. Okay, again, this is when lay people were encouraged to start studying Lotus Sutra and to start doing a recitation of the sutra, right? That was not encouraged by Nichiren Shoshu. Right? Understand that. Okay, so this all actually starts with President Makaguchi's initiation of activities for the Teacher Society, which is the Gokuyukai or whatever it was called, right? Right. Then President Tota spent all that time in prison and really attained Buddhahood there. Yes. All right? So when he came out of prison, he began teaching the Lotus Sutra from his life. All right? That's a different expression of the Lotus Sutra than the theoretical expression that exists in the text itself. Okay? That's taking the teaching of the text and making it your actual life in the same way that Nichiren did. Making the Lotus Sutra your life is the teaching that President Tota taught, and that's also then the basis of how President Ikeda obviously absorbed all of that and has gone on to articulate what it means to him, because he's taking it another step, all right? And he's going to qualify now what that's all about, all right? To this day, memories of my mentor Josei Tota lecturing on the Lotus Sutra come vividly to mind, each like a scene in a great painting. After World War II, the Soka Gakkai was in a state of ruin as a result of the campaign of suppression waged by its militaristic government. At that time, Mr. Tota, later to become the second Soka Gakkai president, began efforts to reconstruct the organization by delivering lectures on the Lotus Sutra to a handful of members. I was a participant in the 7th series of lectures he gave, which began on September 13th, 1948. That was the autumn of my 21st year. He's only 21 years old. The venue was the old Soka Gakkai headquarters in Nishikando, Tokyo. I see that everyone's arrived, he began, President Tota saying. There were 50 to 60 people present. President Tota, his eyes sparkling behind his glasses, gazed around the meeting place, which consisted of 2 small rooms. Then he cleared his throat and began lecturing in a frank manner. And I may have to clear my throat multiple times tonight because I'm coming off an illness. So me and President Tota. Okay. I was instantly awestruck, electrified by the profound ideas, the great and intense confidence, because when you're the Buddha, you speak with confidence. It's not arrogance.
No.
The compassionate cry of concern for the world and humankind that seemed to gush from his very being. President Tota would never make things deliberately difficult and complex. His lectures were clear, straightforward, and easy to understand, yet they glowed with the light of extremely profound truth. They conveyed philosophy rooted directly in life experience. And this is the difference. This is the key. This is how we do human revolution and attain Buddhahood in our present form. They were filled with breathtaking drama and joyous music. At one point, as I listened to him speak, the sun seemed to rise in my heart, and everything became brilliantly illuminated before my eyes. That night, still filled with the thrill I felt during the lecture, I wrote a poem in the pages of my journal. How I marvel, this is what he wrote, how I marvel at the greatness and profundity of the Lotus Sutra. Isn't it the path to the salvation of all humankind? The teaching that enlightens one to the origin of life and the universe? The fundamental principle revealed to enable all people to acquire the loftiest character and happiness? I am 21 years old. Since setting out on my journey of life, what did I contemplate? What did I do? What did I make the wellspring of my happiness? From this day on, I will advance bravely. From this day on, I will live resolutely. I will live within the life of the great law, win over my sufferings. True sadness inspires one to lead a great life. I now see the true great path and perceive the true nature of life. Okay, so he had quite an epiphany during that lecture. Astonished at his profundity and breadth of knowledge, someone once asked President Tota, and this is true, this will be true of you too, "When did you study these things?" Smiling warmly, he replied, "While in prison during the persecution, I chanted Nam-myoho Renge-kyo sincerely, and I studied. As a result, these things seem to have come back to me." The 80,000 sutras, in fact, refer to my own life. These lectures arose, and if he can say that, you must say that too. You must understand that's the whole thing that Daisaku Ikeda grasped from President Tota is going to try and share with you. And until you have that shared with you, you're not really going to understand what he's talking about. Because he's talking about Buddhahood in your present form, not from the theoretical standpoint, but from the standpoint of actual Ichiden sons. Okay? He says, these lectures arose from the vast state of life of President Tota, who had awakened to the essence of Buddhism while in prison. The Lotus Sutra of the former, middle, and latter days. Later, President Tota developed the format for his lectures on the Lotus Sutra. He instituted beginners classes on the expedient means and the lifespan of the Thus Come One chapters, specifically for those who had recently taken faith. His lectures, so brilliant and full of conviction, planted the essence of Buddhism in the hearts of his listeners, without them even being aware of it. For these persons new to faith, many of whom thought of Buddhism only in terms of Shakyamuni, President Tota began each series of lectures by emphasizing that the Lotus Sutra is expressed differently according to the age, depending on whether it is the former, middle, or latter day of the law. President Tota used to say, everyone usually assumes that the Lotus Sutra indicates the 28th chapter text by that name. But there are in fact 3 kinds of Lotus Sutra. The first is the Lotus Sutra of Shakyamuni. This is the 28th chapter sutra of that name. This Lotus Sutra benefited people during Shakyamuni's lifetime and during the former day of the law, because those were the disciples of Shakyamuni. Now in the latter day of the law, even if you should carry out the former day practices of reading and reciting this sutra and copying it out, you will gain no benefit thereby. Our use of the expedient means and lifespan chapters for morning and evening recitation, however, has a different significance. Pardon me, a tissue, my nose is like streaming. Pardon me. Pardon me. Oh my gosh. Pardon me. I'm sick. Whenever he talks about President Tota, I start crying, so I'm sorry. The Lotus Sutra of the middle day of the law is Tentai's great concentration and insight, Makashikan. The Lotus Sutra for the latter day is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the 7-character Lotus Sutra hidden in the depths of the lifespan chapter and brought forth and elucidated by Nichiren. You need to understand that there are 3 kinds of Lotus Sutra and how they are related to one another. In addition to these, there is another Lotus Sutra that was recognized alike by Nichiren Daishonin, Shakyamuni, Tentai, and Dengyo. This is the 24-character Lotus Sutra taught by Bodhisattva, never disparaging. Shakyamuni of India, that was all President Ikeda quoting President Tota, okay? Shakyamuni of India taught that the 28th chapter Lotus Sutra, for those alive during his lifetime and in the former day, Chentai of China expounded, Shakyamuni of India taught the 28th chapter of Lotus Sutra for those alive during his lifetime and in the former day. Tentai of China expounded great concentration and insight for human beings of the middle day of the law. And Bodhisattva, never disparaging, taught the so-called 24-character Lotus Sutra for the people of the middle day of the Buddha called Awesome Sound King. President Tota explained that despite differences in the age and the form in which the teaching was expressed, these are all, in fact, the same Lotus Sutra, because these are all the Lotus Sutra that is lived as a life, okay, by an individual. They're not teachings written down in on paper. The teachings get you to this life condition, which is the function of Buddhahood. All right? That's how other Buddhas become Buddhas. They meet Buddhas. Right? Okay. President Tota called the Lotus Sutra, as thus conceived, the manifold Lotus Sutra. So do you understand that? He's saying all three of these in the greater context are the same. All right? But they all have their expediency in terms of function. They're separated by the time. Do you understand? Okay, so the Lotus Sutra, therefore, is simply not the Lotus Sutra of Shakyamuni. It is also the Lotus Sutra of Tentai and the Lotus Sutra of Bodhisattva, never disparaging. This was a stunning perspective that only President Tota, who had become enlightened to the essence of the Lotus Sutra, could have revealed. So, once again, if your Nichiren Shu, or your Hokke Kimpon Shu, or you're any other sect of Buddhism, you are not going to agree with what President Daisaku Ikeda is teaching in this lecture. Okay? But as a person that is taking the time to read it to you, let me convey to you from my life that this is the correct understanding of what is to be utilized in your life to become a Buddha in your present form. Okay? And there are innumerable examples of individuals that have followed this recipe, followed this understanding, and have been able to not only benefit, but show the proof of actual fact in their life and become Buddhas in their present form as a result. Okay? So it's very important that you not add or subtract, but that you really try to embrace everything that's said here. All right? Because you'll only find it here. All right? The Lotus Sutra, therefore, is simply not the Lotus Sutra of Shakyamuni. In listening to his broad-ranging lectures, his listeners, as a matter of course, could engrave in their lives the distinctions between the Lotus Sutra of Shakyamuni and the Lotus Sutra of Nichiren Daishonin. It's certainly that way for me. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo on page 5. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the Lotus Sutra of the latter day. What do the different expressions of this manifold Lotus Sutra have in common? Ultimately, it is the teaching that everyone equally has the potential to attain Buddhahood. There are, therefore, great differences in the forms whereby Shakyamuni and Nichiren expressed this teaching. Shakyamuni, thank you, Betty. Shakyamuni expressed it as the 28th chapter Lotus Sutra. Nichiren revealed it in the ultimate truth of the Lotus Sutra as Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, enabling all human beings of the latter day to attain Buddhahood. The Daishonin writes, I, Nichiren, have abandoned both the approach that expands and that which condenses and favor the essence of the matter, which means the 5 characters of Myoho Renge-kyo that were transmitted to Bodhisattva superior practices. The 5 characters of Myoho Renge-kyo are the Lotus Sutra appropriate to this age of the latter day of the law. They are the sutra's essence. President Tota therefore termed the Daishonin's teaching of the Lotus Sutra of the President Tota therefore termed the Daishonin's teaching the Lotus Sutra of the latter day. The lineage of votaries of the Lotus Sutra. Continue on page 5. One who expounds a teaching that can enable all people to attain Buddhahood is certain to encounter persecution. We've read that and taught that and discussed that, and we all know that. Even Shakyamuni underwent a succession of great persecutions. Moreover, the Lotus Sutra itself states that whoever spreads it in the latter day of the law is certain to encounter numerous persecutions, even greater than those Shakyamuni faced. Even greater than those Shakyamuni faced. This is clearly shown in such phrases as, since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound, even that when the thus come one is in the world, how much more will this be so after his passing? That's from the Lotus Sutra, page 203. The Lotus Sutra, will face much hostility in the world and will be difficult to believe. Lotus Sutra, page 246. The 3 powerful enemies as described in the concluding verse section of the Encouraging Devotion, the 13th chapter. And on page 232 and 234 discusses the 6 difficult and 9 easy acts as described in the Treasure Tower 11th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. A votary. Now, who's a votary? All of us are votaries, right? All right. A votary who endures, a votary who endures all these great persecutions and perseveres in spreading the teachings among the people, embodies the heart of the Lotus Sutra. So that's supposed to be our objective, right? To be that kind of votary. Enduring persecution to spread the teaching to others is in fact an expression of compassion, because you volunteered for that, right? You volunteered. I'll take on those difficulties in order to succeed in helping others. The life of Nichiren Daishonin, who appeared in the latter day, was a succession of great persecutions, just as the sutra predicts. Nichiren notes that he had encountered persecutions matching in every respect those that the sutra predicts will befall its votary, and he declares himself to be the votary of the Lotus Sutra in the latter day, implying he is the Buddha of the latter day of the law, okay, to reveal the correct teaching for the latter day of the law. At the same time, Nichiren also designates Shakyamuni, Tentai, and Dingyo as votaries of the Lotus Sutra of their respective ages. They were all predecessors who expounded the Lotus Sutra out of their desire for the people's happiness, and who were persecuted as a result. Think about, why did Tentai go into all of the he clarified so much. He brought much more out of it than the original text. Same thing for Myolo, for Dingyo, for all these guys, right? In addition, in many writings, Nichiren praises and offers the greatest encouragement to his followers by calling them votaries of the Lotus Sutra. One such follower was Shijo Kingo, who struggled to overcome great difficulties and persevered in faith without begrudging his life. One woman, the mother of Oto Gozen, who visited him in exile on Sado Island, brought her young daughter with her on the arduous journey. He goes so far as to say to the woman, "You are the foremost votary of the Lotus Sutra among the women of Japan," and gives her the name Sage Nichimyo. Okay, sage is Buddha, right?
Yeah.
Or, very capable person. Buddhism means taking action among people and in society. Page 7. So again, all of you are votaries. Nichiren also says, by the way, and that comes from Nichiren's teaching. That doesn't come from anything that preceded it. Do understand that. Nichiren also says, nevertheless, in the end, when the teaching of the Lotus Sutra have been widely propagated and made known, then they and all others alike throughout the world will become votaries of the Lotus Sutra. Did you hear what that just said? Nevertheless, in the end, when the teachings of the Lotus Sutra have been widely propagated and made known, then they and all others alike throughout the world will become votaries of the Lotus Sutra. He thus indicates the principle that anyone in the world may become a votary of the Lotus Sutra. There is no restriction on that status. It's based on your action. And in the absence of the correct action, you can claim yourself to be a votary all you want to, and it doesn't matter. It's not. Votaries of the Lotus Sutra refer to those who dedicate themselves to the mission of saving all people throughout the entire world and over the 10,000 years and more of the latter day of the law. So what does that say? Votaries of the Lotus Sutra refer to those who consider themselves and have taken the vow to behave as bodhisattvas of the earth, original disciples of the original teacher. Do you understand? All right. So he says, and when the teachings of the Lotus Sutra have been widely propagated and made known, indicates a situation in which individuals, basing themselves on the mystic law, contribute to others and society as votaries, that is, as people of action, as Buddhas in their present form. The Soka Gakkai's first and second presidents, Tanesaburo Makaguchi and Josei Tota, struggled against the country's militarist regime and propagated the law for the people's happiness without begrudging their lives. They went to prison. Accordingly, they certainly have a place in this lineage of votaries of the Lotus Sutra. Nichijun, the 65th chief priest of Daisaku, lauded President Makaguchi as an emissary of the Buddha from birth, and he praised President Tota as the forerunner of the bodhisattvas of the earth. President Tota initiated the great struggle to spread the Lotus Sutra of the latter day for the sake of those laboring under the dire conditions after World War II. I want to banish the word misery from this world and rid the world of poverty and sickness, he said. This passionate cry of my mentor, who stood up alone after the war, still resounds in my ears. This cry of the spirit is none other than the heart of the Lotus Sutra. Buddhism always means action and practice. Enabling people to overcome their difficulties and establish lives of supreme happiness requires dialogue, thoroughgoing dialogue. In such action and practice beats the heart of the Lotus Sutra. So what did he say the whole point is? Huh?
Dialogue.
To become happy. To become happy. The whole point is to become happy. And that the path to that happiness is the action that's reflected in that dialogue and that sense of mission for the sake of the law. The Buddhism hidden in the depths of the Lotus Sutra is open to all. Continuing on page 8. In his lectures, President Tota often spoke as follows. Nichiren Daishonin read the Lotus Sutra from the standpoint of its most profound depths. The great teacher Tentai read the surface or literal meaning of the Lotus Sutra and interpreted its passages and phrases skillfully. When I say Nichiren Daishonin read the Lotus Sutra, bear in mind that he was not reading the Lotus Sutra Shakyamuni expounded just as it was. He was reading it in terms of the meaning contained in its depths from his state of life as the Buddha of the latter day. That's why he can make direct corrections to the misconceptions that preceded his teaching. Okay? This is what he indicates when he refers to the theoretical teachings as he read it, and the lifespan chapter from the perspective of his enlightenment, the orally transmitted teachings. Okay? President Tota explained the correct way to read the sutra today, strictly distinguishing between the literal, surface meaning, which is what most people get hung up on, all right, Shakyamuni's and Tentai's standpoint, and the implicit meaning, or Nichiren's standpoint, which is what we function and practice by as Gakkai members, as President Ikeda and President Tota's disciples. Just what does it mean to read the sutra in terms of its implicit meaning? What's implicit mean? Hidden. It's not explicit. It's not clear. It's not, completely evident. In a nutshell, it is to read it from the standpoint of Nichiren's vast life state, not Shakyamuni's. Read it as a disciple of Nichiren. That's what it means. It means to read it being of the same mind as Nichiren, not trying to emulate Shakyamuni and the thousands of years of preceding interpretations. Okay? We don't need any of that shit. All right? The Daishonin is already qualified. What of those preceding teachings were correct and have something of value, and which ones don't? That's why we study Tentai and Myolo and Dingyo's statements, right? All right. He says, in a nutshell, it is to read it from the standpoint of Nichiren's vast life state, which desires to help all people attain true happiness. Nichiren read the Lotus Sutra with his life as he practiced with the spirit to not begrudge his life. The essence he propagated at the risk of his life was Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the Lotus Sutra of the latter day, or the essential teaching hidden in its depths. The teaching equally available to all people. Don't forget, Nichiren teaches this to women and men equally. Yes. Tentai didn't. Dingyo didn't. Okay? All those guys were great guys with correct understanding, but they were still not in the latter day yet. This is the teaching for the latter day when all people are equal. There is no misogyny anymore. That's correct. All right? Considered from this standpoint, the 28th chapter, Lotus Sutra, becomes in its entirety an explanation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Reading the Lotus Sutra from the standpoint of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is to read it from the standpoint of its implicit meaning. Everybody with me? All right. When we recite, and who else is going to read it from this manner? Only Nichiren's disciples would even begin to have the access to be able to perceive it from that perspective. Do you understand? So this teaching could be there for everybody else to read. They're going to, Go right by them as to what they actually have the ability to actualize in a person's life, rather than fill their head with a bunch of shit that makes you cool. Okay, it doesn't really change your karma. All right? When we recite the expedient means and lifespan chapters in the morning and evening, we do so not from the standpoint of the Lotus Sutra of the former and middle day of the law, but from that of Nichiren's teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So we understand that, right? When we do Gongyo, we're not doing Shakyamuni's Lotus Sutra when we're reciting those chapters, right? A living interpretation is rooted in daily life. So what does that say? A living interpretation is rooted in daily life. If you're going to utilize the interpretation that he's discussing here, it has to be reflected in who you are. This is not mind candy, okay? This is not mental masturbation. This is about becoming the Buddha in your present form. So it has to be rooted in your daily life, right? Otherwise, it's a sham. Nichiren Daishonin lectured on the 28th chapter Lotus Sutra from the standpoint of the teaching hidden in its depths. And Nikko Shonin recorded Nichiren's lectures in the form of the record of the orally transmitted teachings. To revive the heart of the Lotus Sutra and enable all people of the latter day to attain Buddhahood, Nichiren, out of his immense compassion, explains exactly how the past sutra passages should be read. Nothing to add, nothing to leave on the table. Embrace his understanding and make it your own, and you're there. Reading the Lotus Sutra in terms of its implicit meaning, in terms of its extrapolation to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, might be described as interpreting it from the standpoint of the Daishonin's enlightenment. It is not simply a theoretical explanation. That's why you can achieve actual Ichinen Sanzen from it. You couldn't achieve actual Ichinen Sanzen from the theoretical explanation. This interpretation articulates the spirit of the sutra passages from the single perspective of enabling all people who live amid the realities of daily life to become happy. In other words, it is a living interpretation, an interpretation for putting the sutra into practice in our lives, an interpretation from the viewpoint of the human being, an interpretation for ordinary people, an interpretation that focuses on people's daily lives. It is not an interpretation merely for the sake of intellectual knowledge. Rather, it's one based on great wisdom, okay, shared by Buddhists, as to ensure that the sutra's teachings may be developed correctly and boldly as the times and society require. Okay? It's going to be updated naturally and correctly by the disciples that are the votaries in the latter day. That there is no separation between them and Nichiren, do you understand? That's why they've taken Daisaku Ikeda as their mentor. So they can continue on this path that they were destined to from the time they were born. Hidden in the depths at the top of page 10 may imply a mystery closed off to most people, but that is certainly not the case. On the contrary, the true value of Buddhism hidden in the depths lies in its being widely accessible to all people. A living, pulsing force that invigorates the age and society because it's already contained in each and every one's life. Exactly as it is, unadulterated, doesn't need to be changed, doesn't need to be developed. It just needs to be found. It needs to be revealed. Unfortunately, the priests of the Nichiren Shoshu have subverted the intent of this concept. They have misused the idea of the Buddhist teaching hidden in the depths of the Lotus Sutra, mystifying it to bolster their own air of authority. In doing so, they have ascribed to priests and temples a special level of privilege and endeavored to use the Gohonzon, the object of devotion in Nichiren Buddhism, as a tool for controlling people. While failing to engage themselves earnestly in Buddhist practice, they have instead tended toward pursuit of pleasure and personal gratification, allowing their humanity to erode at its root. This is a truly fearsome development. They have, in effect, killed the spirit of Nichiren Daishonin within their own order. With a record of the orally transmitted teachings and my mentor's lectures as my foundation, Daisaku Ikeda is saying, so he's saying it's not just President Tota, it's also my study of the OTT, I hope to address these principles in a way relevant to modern times and society. The benefit of reciting the sutra. Chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the title of the Lotus Sutra, is termed the primary practice, and reciting the expedient means and lifespan chapters, or Gongyo, is called the supplementary practice or supporting practice. That's why we changed the format of Gongyo, so people spent more time chanting Daimoku than doing Gongyo. Okay, Nichikan, the 26th chief high priest of Daisaku, whose interpretation of the Gohonzon we chant to every day, explains the relationship between the primary and supplementary practices by comparing them to food and seasoning, respectively. In other words, when eating rice or noodles, the primary source of nourishment, one uses salt or vinegar as seasoning to help bring out or supplement the flavor. The benefit from carrying out the primary practice is immense. When one recites the expedient means and lifespan chapters, it increases and accelerates the primary practice's beneficial power. Our format for morning and evening Gongyo is chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo as the primary component and reciting the expedient means and lifespan chapters as the supplementary one. The benefit of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is immeasurable. Indeed, there is infinite power in chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo just one time. Why? How can we say that there's infinite power in chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo just one time? Why is he able to say that? And it's a fact. How could there be infinite power in chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo just one time?
Because it switches you.
Right. You're no longer a Buddha in theory. Forever and ever and ever, you will be on the path to the revelation of Buddhahood in your present form, based on that one first single Daimoku. Nichiren writes, if you recite these words of the Daimoku once, then the Buddha nature of all living beings will be summoned and gather around you. He also teaches that the benefit of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo even once is equal to that of reading the entire Lotus Sutra. That of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo 10 times is equal to reading the sutra 10 times. That of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo 100 times is equal to reading the sutra 100 times. And that of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo 1,000 times is equal to reading the sutra 1,000 times. Chant Daimoku. Accordingly, we do not necessarily have to recite the sutra as normal if, for example, we are sick. If we should push ourselves excessively and our condition worsens, then rather than increasing our benefit, it may in fact have the opposite effect. It may destroy our joy and faith and thus generate negative value. So you don't have to be some crazy person. All right? Use your Buddha wisdom. Use common sense. Buddhism is reason. The important thing, therefore, is for each person to make wise judgments, not radical, maniacal judgments. Wise judgments and practice filled with joy at all times, not walking around trying to do shit that's so heavy and burdensome to you that you're not filled with joy. Do you understand?
Right.
That's not the way to go about doing this. All right? The Lotus Sutra, as read from Nichiren's standpoint, the primary practice of Nichiren Buddhism is to... And by the way, I've had a lot of fun throughout my 45 years of practice. I've never had this be anything but fun. Okay? That's the way I did it. The primary practice of Nichiren Buddhism is to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the ultimate truth of the highest Buddhist teaching. Since we are carrying out the supreme primary practice, anything less than the highest supplementary practice would be of no help at all. The supplementary practice Nichiren chose is to recite portions of the expedient means and lifespan chapters. Of the sutra's 28 chapters, these two represent the essence of the theoretical teaching and the essence of the essential teaching, respectively. During Nichiren's time as well, his followers recited portions from these 2 chapters. In one instance, he writes, among the entire 28 chapters, the expedient means chapter and the lifespan chapter are particularly outstanding. The remaining chapters are all, in a sense, the branches and leaves of these 2 chapters. Therefore, for your regular recitation, I recommend that you practice reading the prose sections of the expedient means and lifespan chapters. Notice he said, you will, you must. He doesn't say that. He says, I recommend. He's chill. He understands not everybody's the same. Not everybody's going to be able to do this with the same equal verve and overcome challenges equally. Reciting the sutra and chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo are the roots that, as it were, enable each practitioner to grow into a great tree. The tree of one's life strengthens and grows as a cumulative result of continuing this daily practice. While it may not be possible to see changes from one day to the next, because of the daily nourishment of a consistent practice affords, one's life will become towering and vast like a great tree. You will become the Buddha during your lifetime. As we carry out a steady practice, we will develop a state of absolutely indestructible happiness. That's Buddhahood. As I mentioned earlier, however, the expedient means and lifespan chapters we recite are those of the Lotus Sutra as seen from the Daishonin standpoint of the teaching hidden in the depths, not from Shakyamuni's perspective. Nichikan, 26th high priest whose Gohonzon we chant to, explains that we read the expedient means chapter to refute its surface meaning and to borrow its phrases. We read the lifespan chapter, he says, to refute its surface meaning and to use the profound meaning implicit in the chapter. Reading these chapters from the standpoint of Nichiren Buddhism, we refute their surface meaning. It is though we were saying the Lotus Sutra of Shakyamuni has no beneficial power in the latter day of the law. All right? Because it doesn't.
Right.
At the same time, or else you're going to be hanging on to Shakyamuni as your true teacher or something. No, you don't have a relationship with Shakyamuni. Understand that. Your relationship as someone born in the latter day of the law qualifies. You don't have that relationship. If you had a relationship with Shakyamuni, we would have been born in the former of the middle day. You weren't, so let it go. This is the time for the Buddhism of sowing, right? He says, at the same time, from Nichiren's standpoint, we also recite the Lotus Sutra because it praises the greatness of the Gohonzon. This way of reading it corresponds to borrowing and using its words. Do you understand? You've seen how many times he takes something from the Lotus Sutra, which was obviously not speaking specifically or explicitly of the Gohonzon, and he qualifies. This is really talking about the Gohonzon. Okay? That's Nichiren's teaching. That's where he leads us to this understanding that we borrow and utilize. All right? While there are meticulous arguments, and when he says that, he says, while there are meticulous arguments to substantiate this explanation. Okay? So he's saying, for those of you that want to be all Buddhist scholars and Nichiren scholars that want to get into a pissing contest and debate this with me, that I do have the qualifying information to validate my point that I've just expressed here as being absolutely unassailable. And I will win that debate. But because that's not the purpose of this writing, I'll leave that to those that want to do that another time. He says, while there are meticulous arguments to substantiate this explanation, for the time being I will simply confirm the point that in reading the expedient means and lifespan chapters, we do so from the standpoint of Nichiren Buddhism. Continue to page 13. Your chanting voices reach the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I imagine some may wonder how reading sutra passages you cannot understand could bring about any benefit. Let me reassure you that there is definitely benefit from carrying out this practice. The Daishonin writes, a baby does not know the difference between water and fire and cannot distinguish medicine from poison. But when the baby sucks milk, its life is nourished and sustained. Although one may not be versed in various sutras, if one listens to even one character or one phrase of the Lotus Sutra, one cannot fail to attain Buddhahood. Just as a baby will grow naturally of its own accord by drinking milk. This is continuing on the lecture. Previously was a quote from the Gosho. If you earnestly chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo with faith in the Gohonzon, which is how you should always be chanting when you're in front of the Gohonzon, your life will definitely come to shine with immeasurable good fortune and benefit. To cite another example, dogs have a language in the world of dogs, and birds have a language in the world of birds. While people cannot understand these languages, dogs and birds can certainly communicate within their own species. Also, though some people do not understand scientific jargon or a particular language, others can communicate very well in these languages. Similarly, it might be said that when we are reciting the sutra as, pardon me, what did I just miss? Okay, I skipped a page, sorry. Similarly, it might be said that when we are reciting the sutra or chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, we are speaking in the language of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Even though you may not understand what you are saying, your voice definitely reaches the Gohonzon, all Buddhist deities and all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas over the 3 existences and the 10 directions. In response, the entire universe bathes you in the light of good fortune. At the same time, of course, if you study the sutra with this practice as your basis, and with a seeking spirit, you can, as a matter of course, deepen your confidence and strengthen your faith. And that's what we're doing right now. Okay? Our practice revitalizes us. When we do Gongyo and chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, we conduct a ceremony in which we praise the Gohonzon and the great pure law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. On one level, it could be said that our daily chanting is like a paean for the Buddha and for Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the fundamental law of the universe. At the same time, we are also praising the eternal life of the universe and of the world of Buddhahood in our own lives, our eternal Buddha nature. When we chant to the Gohonzon, right then and there, the doors of the microcosm within us open completely to the macrocosm, and we can experience a great and serene sense of happiness as though gazing out over the entire universe. I'm sure you've all had that sensation from time to time when everything suddenly becomes clear, if you can only hold on to that, right? We savor tremendous fulfillment and joy, as you were explaining to me. You read something makes you very happy, right? That's what he's talking about. When we savor tremendous fulfillment and joy, which is exactly what you described to me, and gain access to a great and all-encompassing wisdom, which is exactly what you described to me, right? The microcosm that is encompassed by the universe in turn encompasses the universe, the entire universe. The microcosm that is encompassed by the universe in turn encompasses the entire universe. Our morning and evening practice is an invigorating ceremony of beginningless time, time without beginning, Kuan Ganjo, that revitalizes us from the very depths of our being. Therefore, the important thing is to chant each day filled with a sense of rhythm and cadence, like a horse galloping through the heavens. We chant Daimoku. Each one's equivalent to chanting the whole sutra. Why are you going to do it slow? Right? Yeah! I hope you will chant in a way that leaves you refreshed and revitalized in both body and mind. Going through the Lotus Sutra hundreds of times in the morning, yeah, that'll leave you refreshed and revitalized. The King of Sutras, I'm almost done. The King of Sutras on page 15. The King of Sutras makes people strong and wise. You all know that from practical experience, personal experience. The Lotus Sutra is the King of Sutras, the scripture that calls out to all people. It is a teaching, it is a living teaching that embodies the Buddha's compassion and egalitarian outlook. It is a scripture of renaissance, overflowing with the spirit of revitalization that makes human beings strong and wise. And the expedient means and lifespan chapters are the heart of the sutra. No practice is as universally accessible to all people as the practice of reciting the sutra and chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo set forth by Nichiren Daishonin. This is the Buddhist practice that is most open and accessible to all people. I learned it by just hearing the words. During Nichiren's lifetime, both priests and lay people assiduously recited the sutra and chanted Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. For most people in Japan today, sutras have become something distant and remote, their only exposure to them being when they hear priests intoning them at funerals. This tendency to depend on priests, which has come to be regarded as so natural that no one questions it, has produced a spiritual foundation of blind obedience to religious authority. It is the fundamental evil that allows the clergy to grow arrogant and decadent. Today, however, thanks to the Soka Gakkai's development, people not only in Japan but throughout the world joyously chant the mystic law and recite the expedient means and lifespan chapters. And again, that only happened because of the Soka Gakkai. It didn't happen because of Nichiren Shu or Nichiren Shoshu or Kempon Hoki Shu or any gosh darn Nichiren sect. I almost swore, pardon me. All right? Today, however, thanks to the Soka Gakkai's development, people not only in Japan but throughout the world joyously chant the mystic law and recite the expedient means and lifespan chapters, because as members of the SGI we do Gongyo. All right? This is the grand undertaking wholly without precedent in the history of Buddhism, except with the Soka Gakkai. It constitutes the great religious revolution of our time, which is why Daisaku Ikeda talks about it like this, in this manner. Nichiren Buddhism, the Buddhism of the people, is generating a great light and happiness throughout the world. Millions are experiencing the beneficial power of the mystic law and acting out the wonderful drama of their human revolution. More than anything else, this fact attests most eloquently to the correctness of the SGI, which carries on the spirit of the Lotus Sutra in the present age, and my personal benefits do for me as well. And I'm sure you are all the same way. As I work on these lectures, I have images of these many friends in mind. I will proceed as though carrying on a discussion with each of you while gazing up into the clear blue sky or strolling along a path through a field filled with fragrant blooming flowers. I only have 2 pages to read so that we can start cleanly next week on 1. So this is a little more of introduction here on the expedient means chapter, and then we're going to actually start with 1 on page 23. So this is just 2 more pages. Okay. He says, practicing the Lotus Sutra on the expedient means chapter. Practicing the Lotus Sutra causes the sun to rise in our hearts. No matter how stormy our situation, when the sun rises in the depths of our lives, a clear, bright sky, like the blue sky of May, opens in our hearts. And when we possess in our hearts the 4 virtues of eternity, happiness, true self, and purity, then the land, the place where we are, shines as the land of eternally tranquil light. That's what I was saying to you this morning, brother. Right? That's what I was talking about, even though I hadn't read this. That's what he's talking about. Well, everyone has a sun in his or her heart. All too few are aware it exists. That's what we're talking about. The awareness of the sun exists within you already. The Lotus Sutra is a scripture that reveals the brilliant sun of Buddhahood inherent in our lives. You yourself are a Buddha. Revere the sun of Buddhahood in your own life. This is the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra, the message of the expedient means chapter. Shakyamuni perceived that everyone possesses Buddhahood just as he did. He made it possible for everyone to advance along the path of which he had become enlightened. Based on the irrefutable proposition that all human beings are respectable and that no human being is better than anyone else, Shakyamuni went out among the people and expounded the law continuously. Buddhism is the path of limitless self-improvement. In the latter half of the expedient means chapter, Shakyamuni explains that Buddhas appear in the world. Why did we all manifest in this lifetime as bodhisattvas of the earth? Because being a bodhisattva of the earth is to be a Buddha that appears in this world. All right? Do understand that? He says, Shakyamuni explains that bodhisattvas of the earth appear in the world in order to open the door of, show, cause living beings to awaken to, and cause living beings to enter the path of the Buddha wisdom and that inherently exists in human life. Okay, to reveal that which already exists within all others. He further states that all people can equally develop the Buddha's state of life, and that he has fulfilled a vow he made long ago by expounding the Lotus Sutra, which enables them to do so, making everyone equal to yourself. I think the spirit of expedient means, as these passages expresses, is a profound form of humanistic education. We want everybody to understand what we understand. Buddhism starts from the recognition of each person's infinite potential. You have to recognize that you are the Buddha, that you don't have limitations before you can overcome all of them. And it teaches the means whereby people can awaken to and draw forth from the supreme treasures of Buddhahood. When people become aware of this treasure in their lives, they also come to recognize it in others, and will treat their fellow human beings with heartfelt respect. At the same time, they naturally take actions to spark the same awareness in others. Right? This all makes sense, right? When we make such efforts, the treasures in our own lives is polished, and this in turn enables us to develop still more confidence in our innate potential and dignity. This is that whole process of human revolution until you finally realize, oh, I am the Buddha. Buddhist practice is thus the path of limitless self-improvement. That's what it's all going toward. After hearing the Buddha expound expedient means, Shariputra and the other voice hearers attain enlightenment. Vowing to take action among the people, they become voice hearers who devote themselves to the people. They emerge as true disciples of the Buddha, which makes them no longer voice hearers, right? Mm-hmm. They just suddenly became bodhisattvas. Shariputra and the others, no doubt, were moved by the profound compassion of their mentor, Shakyamuni. The great light of the Buddha wisdom suddenly illuminated the darkness of their formerly self-centered and tightly closed hearts. Their hearts opened and expanded widely, as ours do too naturally in that process, as we do human revolution over the course of however many years it takes us to attain it. They understand it has been the Buddha's intention all along to guide them to Buddhahood, the vast and boundless state of life. They realize that attaining the two vehicles, the worlds of voice hearers and cause awakened ones, or the three vehicles, the worlds of voice hearers, cause awakened ones, and bodhisattvas, was not the true aim of the Buddha's teaching. 7, 8, and 9 are actually components of 10, right? This teaching that guides people to aspire to the Buddhist state of life, the one vehicle, the 10th world, rather than the three vehicles, 7, 8, and 9, is called the replacement of the three vehicles with the one vehicle. Okay, it's not really a replacement, it's a clarification that the three vehicles equal the one vehicle. This is the central teaching of the first half or theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra. And of the 14 chapters that make up the theoretical teaching, expedient means is the central pillar. In Buddhism, the term expedient means refers to the skillful means or methods Buddhas employ to guide people to enlightenment. The expedient means chapter extols the wisdom of the Buddhas to thus instruct the people. Later, I will elaborate further on the profound meaning of expedient means. The essence of the entire expedient means chapter. This is it. Page 21. I'll be done. last two paragraphs. The essence of the entire expedient means chapter. Every day we recite the opening portion of expedient means, the most important part of the entire chapter. Briefly, the contents of this part of the chapter are as follows. First, Shakyamuni clarifies that the wisdom to which all Buddhas are enlightened is infinitely profound and immeasurable. That means it's unfathomable. And that it is well beyond the capacity of Shariputra and the other voice hearers to comprehend it. They can't fathom it. Shariputra then says he has employed similes and various other means to Shakyamuni, then says he has employed similes and various other means to skillfully expound the Buddha wisdom to the people. Finally, he reveals that the wisdom of all Buddhas is none other than the comprehension of the true aspect of all phenomena. It's nothing more than the realizing what the truth is. What is the truth? We're all Buddhas. Finally, he reveals that the wisdom of all Buddhas is none other than the comprehension, the understanding with your life of the true aspect of all phenomena, the truth of what the truth really is. This concludes the portion of the expedient means we recite each day. In a nutshell, the true aspect of all phenomena represents the principle that all people have the potential to be Buddhists. In other words, this passage reveals in theoretical terms the path whereby all people can attain Buddhahood. The portion we recite during Gongyo is thus the very essence of the entire expedient means chapter. Let us now proceed to the contents of expedient means, and we'll continue next week on page 23.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.